Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Senator Tom Cotton represents the great state of Arkansas. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back. Good to have you.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be back on with you. A belated happy Thanksgiving to you and your listeners, and an early Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Let me begin with Peter Baker's tweet of about 3 minutes ago, summarizing a New York Times article this morning. Biden administration warns Israel that it must fight more surgically and avoid further mass displacement of Palestinians in its war against Hamas to avoid a humanitarian crisis that overwhelms the world's ability to respond. I can't even believe that. Can you imagine that during our battle in Mosul or during our battles in Japan and Germany, Senator Cotton?
Yeah, the Biden administration should shut its pie hole, Hugh. Israel should bounce the rubble in Gaza if that's what it takes to destroy Hamas's infrastructure and its tunnel network and kill all of its leaders and its fighters. And like you said, of course we didn't hold ourselves to this standard in World War II. Nobody was wringing their hands about giving humanitarian aid into Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan. And over the span of just a couple nights, the spring of 1945, we did much, much worse in Dresden and Tokyo than anything Israel's done in Gaza. So the Biden administration, once again, as I predicted, starting on October 8th, is in overdrive trying to pressure the government of Israel not to take the steps necessary.
Well, they're in overdrive to be Janus. They want their pro-Israel Democrats to believe that they are 100% with Israel, and they want their pro-Hamas Democrats to be convinced that they're 100% in favor of Palestine. You can't pull that off, Senator. It's not. Yesterday they got ahead of Israel and said Israel's agreed to the pause, and Israel hadn't agreed to the extension of the pause. They did, but they hadn't when Biden put the pressure on.
Yeah, Hugh, I mean, I think you put your finger on an important point. This is not just a matter of misguided and muddled thinking about national security, as Joe Biden has been guilty of for 50 years, as Bob Gates, his former colleague in the Obama administration, wrote. This is also about Democratic Party politics. The Democratic Party is tearing itself apart over Israel right now. You have an open revolt of people who work for Joe Biden, not protesters in the streets alone, but people who work for Joe Biden or work for the Democratic National Committee, condemning him, writing open letters condemning his policy, organizing boycotts of the 2024 vote. And that's why Joe Biden seems to put more pressure on Israel than he puts on Hamas.
Now, Senator, you've actually led platoons in a combat area of Baghdad during the surge. As you watch how Israel is proceeding, how do you judge their level of caution and their effort to minimize civilian casualty?
Well, first off, Hugh, let me express my admiration for the bravery and the skill of the Israeli Defense Forces who are operating in Gaza. It's like nothing I faced in Baghdad in 2006. Some of our soldiers faced some fighting like that in places like Fallujah in 2004, but certainly far beyond the intensity of what I faced in Baghdad in 2006. By all indications, the IDF is operating with unusual care and restraint, as they always do, because they know, their leaders know, their elected leaders know they are held to an unfair double standard by international opinion. And they've been very deliberate, very careful, not only in trying to minimize civilian casualty, but also to protect their own forces. And I hope soon see what's happened in northern Gaza happen in southern Gaza, which I suspect is where most of the at-large Hamas leaders have escaped to over the last 5 days.
Now, Senator, I just spoke with Ambassador Orrin. I spoke with Aviv Reddick-Gur earlier about what comes after Hamas is destroyed and as many of the hostages as possible are freed and rescued. And their answer begins with negatives. Not the UN, not the Palestinian Authority. Have you had, let me first ask it, have you received any briefing from the Department of State on their plans for Gaza post-war?
No, I haven't personally, Hugh, and I don't really care that much about what the Department of State thinks. Tony Blinken is part of the failed Biden administration that led to Hamas and Iran being so emboldened just to commit the atrocities on October 7th, or Vladimir Putin invading Russia, or the collapse of Kabul. So whatever the State Department proposes, I suspect will be full-headed and unworkable. Now, I don't disagree with what Avi Reddick-Gur or Michael Oren have said, nor do I think that that Israel should be restrained until they've come up with some new grand governing coalition for Gaza after Hamas is destroyed. You know, FDR didn't wring his hands about what was going to happen in Germany or Japan after we declared war in those countries. We didn't wring our hands about what was going to happen after we destroyed ISIS. We just knew that those malevolent forces had to be destroyed. So right now the focus should be on the progress of arms on the battlefield, not some governing coalition after Hamas is destroyed.
Well, I've also reminded people that in Japan, we didn't ask the Soviets in, even though they had borne the brunt of World War II casualties, because they didn't fight Japan. So they didn't get to decide what happened in Japan. MacArthur ran Japan. I don't know that Israel has to invite anyone in, except they want to get out, except for security purposes afterwards. And, there are allies of the United States, MBZ, MBS, others, who could step in here. Do you expect that they will?
That's possible, Hugh. It's possible that some of the Arab nations will want to play a constructive role here in a post-war environment. Certainly more constructive than the United Nations play. There'd be no role whatsoever for the United Nations, which is almost genetically anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Frankly, the Palestinian Authority hasn't demonstrated the willingness or ability to govern its own territories anyway. Time and time again, they've had a chance to have their own states. As Joe Biden and Tony Blinken keep saying, they still want a two-state solution despite the failures of the PA and the atrocities of Hamas over the last 20 years. And they always say no. And why is that? It's because their leaders and the Palestinian people in general don't want peace with Israel. They want victory over Israel. And that means, as they say time and again, as people like Rashida Tlaib, the anti-Semitic congresswoman from Michigan, says time and again, from the river to the sea, which means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, an eliminationist slogan against the Jewish people and their nation.
Senator, last question. I don't know that you have any expertise in this, but I'll ask it anyway. There's a statute called the Alien Tort Claims Act, which allows for the victims of torts committed abroad and their families. So it allows foreigners to use American courts to reclaim the money owed by the people who injured them. Do you think that the American courts can help the victims of 10/7 recover anything from any Hamas member, anyone who supports Hamas, anyone who gives them aid and comfort? Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, I hope so, Hugh. I have some familiarity with the Alien Tort Claims Act, and I do think that it could be a viable path, along with a few other statutes or common law standards to help the victims of the October 7th attacks collect, not just against Hamas and its billionaire leadership sitting in their luxury condos in Doha, but also against Hamas's patrons, Iran. And I've been involved in some legislation in Congress that also helps improve the chances of terror victims in the United States and abroad collecting against these terrorist organizations and Iran, the world's worst terrorist sponsor state.
I would love to see Judiciary Committee hold a hearing on that, because I think those Hamas operatives in Doha, they've got billions. And those billions ought to belong to the victims of 10/7 and their families. I hope that is the case. Senator Tom Cotton, thank you for joining me this morning. Keep coming back. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.